She was just 14, alone, unwanted, carrying nothing but a broken suitcase and a stuffed rabbit with one ear. He was a battered cowboy, living on a dying ranch no one cared about anymore. Neither of them was looking for family. Neither believed in second chances. But sometimes, when the world forgets you, when even hope seems foolish, all it takes is a stubborn heart, a little kindness, and a place you can call your own. This isn't a story about saving the world. It's about saving each other. Welcome to Willow Creek. The late afternoon sun burned low and heavy over the broken hills of Willow Creek, turning the sky the color of old copper. Dust hung in the air, clinging to every crevice of the abandoned ranch. Sagging fences leaned like tired men, and the once proud barn stood with a gaping hole in its roof, a monument to years of storms and neglect. Emma Carson trudged up the rutted dirt road, boots too big for her small feet scuffing the dry earth. Her clothes were worn thin, a patched brown dress, a fraying woolen shawl that had once belonged to her mother. In her right hand, she clutched a battered suitcase. In her left, a threadbare stuffed rabbit, its left ear sewn back on with mismatched blue thread. It was the only thing from her childhood she hadn't lost. When she reached the crooked porch, she hesitated. The house, if it could still be called that, looked deserted. Windows boarded up, porch boards warped and split, yet there was smoke rising from a rusty stovepipe. Someone lived here. Emma pressed her lips together to keep from trembling. No more crying. You're too old for that now. She knocked, a hollow, uncertain sound that barely carried in the dry wind. The door creaked open. Jack Holloway filled the doorway, a tall man with shoulders stooped from old injuries and work too hard for one lifetime. His face was seamed with lines, not just from the sun, but from things he didn't talk about. His dark gray eyes studied her with suspicion, one brow twitching in annoyance. He wore a battered hat pushed low, and his right leg, stiff and awkward, dragged a little as he stepped onto the porch. The war had taken his brother. It had left him with a limp, a ranch in ruins, and a heart so well defended he barely remembered how to open it. "What do you want?" Jack said, voice rough as gravel. Emma swallowed. The words stuck. She felt them. "Please, let me stay." But pride, as raw and stubborn as any grown man's, held them back. "I'll work," she said finally. Her voice cracked, humiliating her, but she forced herself not to flinch. "I don't need charity." Jack squinted at her, seeing too much. The hunger in her cheeks, the desperation wrapped around her small shoulders like that worn-out shawl. He knew the world didn't make room for girls like her. And he didn't have room either. Not in the house. Not in his broken-down life. But maybe there were things a man didn't have a choice about. Without another word, Jack turned, limped back into the house, and came out carrying an old horse blanket. Rough wool, moth-eaten in spots. He tossed it to Emma. "Bunkhouse out back," he grunted. "Ain't much. Keep the door shut so the coyotes don't get curious." Emma nodded once, fiercely, clutching the blanket as though it were a crown. She picked up her suitcase and headed around the house. The bunkhouse was little more than a shed with a warped door and a cracked window. Inside it smelled of dry wood, dust, and a faint trace of hay. But it was shelter. It was hers. She unrolled the blanket on a splintery cot, curled up tight with the stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, and waited for the tears she knew would come. But none did. Outside, Jack sat by the flickering fire, staring into the flames as the sky faded from copper to indigo. He didn't know why he'd let her stay. Maybe because she'd looked at him the same way he looked at the ranch every morning, like something half dead that could still, somehow, be saved. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Holloway stayed up long after the fire burned down to ash, just listening to the sound of another human breathing, soft and broken, through the cold desert night. The first winter storm rolled over Willow Creek like a living thing, howling and clawing at the broken fences. Snow smothered the dying fields under a heavy white silence. The bunkhouse Emma slept in had cracks in the walls wide enough to let the cold crawl in and settle deep into her bones. But she didn't complain. Every morning, before the pale sun dragged itself over the hills, Emma was up, hauling buckets of water from the half-frozen well, feeding the 2 skeletal horses Jack had refused to sell, patching holes in the barn roof with strips of old canvas. Her fingers, too small and raw from the cold, bled through the thin gloves she wore. Her breath puffed out in little white clouds. Some days she thought she'd collapse where she stood, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. Jack watched, mostly in silence. Once, when she stumbled carrying a heavy sack of oats, he muttered, "You're tougher than you look," and handed her a battered pair of woolen mittens. He never said more, but Emma felt it. A tiny thread connecting them, almost invisible, but there. Still, hardship was only part of the storm brewing. The real storm arrives. One gray afternoon, Riley Morgan rode up the trail, the kind of man whose smile was never kind. Riley was younger than Jack, but with the same rough build and the easy arrogance of someone who thought the world owed him. He pulled his horse up by the porch, swung down with a practiced ease, and tipped his hat. "Jack," he drawled, "thought I'd come offer you a little relief." Jack didn't move from where he sat sharpening an old blade. His body was stiff, guarded. Riley went on, pretending not to notice the closed door, the sagging porch, the girl's shadow barely visible through the window. "You know, this land's worthless now," Riley said. "A man could save himself a whole heap of trouble by selling what's left." Jack said nothing. His silence was sharper than any words. Riley's smile soured. "Suit yourself," he said, tugging at his gloves. "But you keep harboring strays." His gaze flicked meaningfully toward the bunkhouse. "People start talking. Sheriff's ear ain't too far from the wind." And with that thinly veiled threat, he rode off, leaving dust and suspicion in his wake. The whispers begin. It didn't take long. The town was small, the people tight-knit and hungry for gossip. First, the grocer turned away when Emma came to ask about work. Then the blacksmith, who'd once offered to fix Jack's tools for a handshake, muttered that his schedule was too full. Even the old widow who ran the bakery, a woman Jack had once helped after her husband's passing, tightened her mouth into a thin line and closed the door in Emma's face. The worst came a week later. The sheriff himself pulled up outside Willow Creek, a heavy-set man with a tired face and a badge that glinted coldly in the afternoon sun. Jack met him on the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed low. "Jack," the sheriff said, tipping his hat, voice low and cautious. "Town's getting uneasy. Folks say you're keeping a runaway girl. Might be better if she moved on." Emma listened from inside the house, her heart hammering in her chest. "Move on to where?" she wanted to scream. "There's nowhere left." Jack's voice, rough and steady, broke through the fear. "She ain't hurting nobody, ain't begging either. She pulls her weight." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "I know that, Jack. But talk's like wildfire. Can't stop it once it's lit." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then he raised his chin slightly, not in defiance, but in grim acceptance. "She stays." The sheriff nodded, touched his hat again, and rode away. Cracks in the walls. That night, Jack sat silent by the fire, the shadows from the flames dancing across his worn features. Emma sat across from him, patching a ripped sleeve with careful stitches. though she could barely see through the tears burning her eyes. Jack never once looked at her. But when he pushed the last piece of cornbread across the table toward her, he did it without a word, and it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in months. Emma realized then that survival at Willow Creek wasn't about comfort. It was about stubbornness. It was about staying put when every cruel whisper and biting wind tried to tear you away. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear, the sadness, the terrible loneliness, a tiny ember flared to life. She would stay, not because she was wanted, but because she had decided. This broken place would be her home, and if anyone wanted to take it from her, they'd have to fight harder than she would. Winter dragged on at Willow Creek, biting and merciless. Emma worked tirelessly, patching the roof, hauling water, sewing torn clothes, failing, learning, and stubbornly rising again. Her hands cracked and bled from the cold, but she never once asked for help. Jack watched in silence, offering small gestures instead of words. A spool of thread left by her door, a pair of old boots placed by her bed. No praise, no comfort, but a silent acknowledgement. You belong here. Knowing the ranch couldn't survive on stubbornness alone, Emma started sneaking into town at night, working odd jobs, scrubbing floors, patching clothes, hauling crates. Every cent she earned, she hid under her bunk, saving for the ranch's future. Meanwhile, Jack fought his own battles, patching the barn with splintered wood, trapping rabbits for food, dragging his bad leg through the snow with quiet, relentless determination. When a late storm ripped through the valley, Emma woke to the howl of wind tearing at the bunkhouse. Without hesitation, she grabbed boards and a hammer, fighting to save what little shelter she had. Jack, watching from the porch, cursed under his breath, then pulled on his coat and joined her, bracing the boards against the raging wind. Together, soaked and shivering, they fought the storm, side by side, not with words, but with the kind of bond no town gossip could ever break. When morning came, the bunkhouse still stood, battered, patched, but still standing, just like them. And for the first time, Emma allowed herself a flicker of hope. Maybe this place, this broken, battered ranch, was her home after all. Spring crept back to Willow Creek with cautious steps. The fields, long dead, blushed green under soft rains. Wildflowers clung to the broken fences Emma had repaired with her own small hands. The ranch still looked worn, but it lived again. They lived again. A gift, made of wood and hope. On the morning of Emma's 15th birthday, Jack called her out to the porch. He didn't say anything at first, just handed her a small, crooked wooden sign he'd carved himself, rough letters burned deep into the grain. Emma's place. The words blurred in her eyes before she could stop the tears. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't polished. But it was real. It said she belonged. It said she mattered. Jack coughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Bunkhouse needed a proper name, he muttered. Emma clutched the sign to her chest like it was treasure. Without asking, without needing permission, she nailed it above the bunkhouse door. The last challenge. Hope bloomed, and so did threats. Riley Morgan came riding in one last time, smug and sneering. Offered Jack a pittance for the land. Mocked the girl. Hinted that next time he might just take what he wanted. But Jack didn't rise. This time, Emma stepped forward, small but unshakable. Her voice was steady as iron. This land's taken. You'll have to find some other place to steal from. Riley laughed, but he left. For good. And Jack, watching her with something like pride in his worn eyes, realized the fight had already been won, not with fists, but with roots planted deep into stubborn earth. The fire that didn't burn down. That night, after the chores were done and the crickets sang in the grass, Jack and Emma sat by the fire outside. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly between them, warm, steady, alive. Finally, Jack handed her a photograph, faded and cracked, of a much younger man standing proudly before a thriving ranch, arm around a smiling boy. "My father," Jack said gruffly. "And me, long time ago." Emma traced the photo's edge with her thumb, reverent. "You think we can make it like that again?" she whispered. Jack stared into the flames. "Maybe better," he said. A long silence. Then Emma said, soft, fierce, "Thank you for giving me a place." Jack shook his head. "You built it yourself, girl. I just got out of your way." They sat like that until the stars wheeled high overhead. Two stubborn, weather-beaten souls bound not by blood, but by something stronger. Choice. Epilogue. Home. As the seasons turned, Willow Creek didn't become a grand ranch again. The barn still leaned, the fences still creaked, the bunkhouse still needed patching every spring, but laughter echoed there now. Fresh bread baked in the kitchen, flowers grew in coffee cans along the porch, and under the faded sign, Emma's Place. A broken girl and a broken man stitched a new kind of family from the scraps everyone else had thrown away. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was theirs, and for the first time in her life, Emma knew. She hadn't just found a place to hide. She had found home.